Yeah, like I reach out to Burton, to Camille Job. Do you know
Yeah,
Camille?
I talked to
She's great.
Camille.
You
I
know?
talked to Camille.
So I call Burton, I call Camille, Scott Speck too.
Yeah.
And it's
I
just like
Scott.
over the years, like I've just they've become really, good friends and stuff.
Did you go looking for that, or did it just kind of happen?
No, it just like, I think just years of like, running a small office and, I don't have partners, right? Like I have my employees that are very close that I run ideas past, but it's kind of like, there's certain decisions that you have to make that are tough. And, just like, especially, I think that's one of the advantages of like having a partner, right? And you have somebody you can
trust
like
and
batten these things around. I just don't have that. And my wife can only handle so much, So, but yeah, just, I think what the point I was trying to make is that what I like about the sort of growing kind of, landscape of podcasts is that it does begin to feel a little like community, like listening to, even if it's just like inside baseball stuff too, like how architects run their offices or different decision making and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, our world specifically chooses to mostly speak about the glamour, right? In the final product, and then less about the mess, and less about the headache, and less about the real pain of
day-to-day challenges,
owning a business or building a building or communicating, between teams.
Yeah.
And I think this is really,
which is like
platform
98% of
that's
the
right,
job,
right.
Yeah. You're right. It's like sort of like the Instagram version where it's like you only see the shiny, pretty moments.
By the time we get to photographs, man, I just don't want to go out there anymore.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. The challenges. I've actually discovered. Like it's not a podcast, but a blog that's really cool called Construction Physics. Do you know this blog?
No.
You guys should check it out. It's pretty amazing. There's so little, like, I think what I would call like really rigorous, like academic writing on construction.
Yeah.
And it's super interesting. Like he goes really deep into like why is it difficult to create efficient construction methodologies, like why is prefabrication not working? Then he goes through all of these like amazing examples of like companies that have started and failed at like the prefabrication thing. Yeah, it's super interesting.
Construction physics.
Yeah, it's called construction physics. And he has this theory, which is like, can't remember, I'm kind of trying to paraphrase it here, but it's like worse is better. What he calls worse is better in construction. Yeah. And like one example he uses, which I think is super interesting, is like why stick framing is such like a prolific and ubiquitous construction and inexpensive construction methodology, and why why more efficient stick framing just didn't take off, like spacing like 24 inches on center and it's such an interesting kind of perspective on construction and what he calls, like, again, I'm like paraphrasing, but it's something like regional culture in construction, like, and the number of people that come together. But he has this really great way, can't remember his name, but check out the blog. He has this great way of kind of putting together and kind of illustrating like all of these complex factors is like why construction is still, because I think it's something, like we think about a lot. It's like, why is it that, prefabrication or chunking and certain efficiencies in manufacturing have taken off, right? Mm-hmm. But in construction, it's still
why do you think that is?
Well, again, I think it's like it goes back to this like construction. I mean, it's a number of factors, but one is that it's a community of trades basically that comes together to create something. And something I've noticed is like you can have, we'll detail a certain way, like say in a house, we'll have a certain standard, like say casing detail around a door that we'll do it 3 or 4 times and it's like never an issue. And then we'll meet one contractor and it's just like, they just can't get it, right? Yeah. They keep fucking it up. And it's because you're dealing with a different group of people. Yeah. So, but he talks about it like the construction efficiencies are difficult to achieve because you have this like kind of community of trades that is very regionally based, right? Like Austin is a very specific market. Austin, Toronto, New York, San Francisco have these especially like in residential construction, this very specific, very inflated market.
Do you think that creates a resistance to that methodology of construction?
I think that like one of the interesting things I find about, like, say in residential construction, that you can have 4 sheets of drawings, right? Mm-hmm. And that you can just hand it. And as long as you're dealing with like what we call like standard detailing, you're relying on a kind of inherited knowledge, or like what they call this like community of trades, to kind of put a building together, right? Like you think about like even a standard kind of spec home has like hundreds of parts and hundreds of like, sophisticated details, but that's just like they're implemented through this kind of shared knowledge, right? Yeah. And one of the things is, in architecture too, that I find kind of interesting is if you deviate from that standard knowledge even slightly, right, then it just like prices kind of go through the roof and things kind of go off the rails. So one of the challenges as an architect, and what I think is kind of interesting about architecture, is that we rely on that kind of like shared knowledge kind of handed down from generation to generation, for better or worse, right? Yeah. Like, and again, with stick framing, it's just like you're relying on the framer's knowledge to put the building together. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Commercial's a little different, right? Like you're following the drawings a little more clearly. So it's hard to quote innovate if you're relying on these. Like, it's like the idea of switching to like for a while there, like 10 or 15 years ago, I don't know who was marketing it, but like metal stud construction, makes a lot of sense to a certain degree, right? But it's like how many framers have like a set of tin snips? They've got like skill saws, right? Yeah. So there's a number of different factors that are involved that are but I do think that one of the challenges of architecture is that we have this delusion that we actually have control over those things. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like when really we don't. We're kind of like just bit players in a much larger system. But anyway, check out that. It's really, I read like 20 of them over the Christmas holidays.
What you're saying is real interesting, because we talk about it all the time, and that it's like this paradox, right? That we're challenged to be some of the most creative and thoughtful people, industry, right? But yet we're stuck in this real traditional way of thinking, a way of talking, way of communicating, order of operation, and we just march to the beat.
Right.
Right. And for better, for worse, I think that architects, and maybe, I don't know if you agree or not, but we've essentially been pushed down on the food chain in terms of how do we, in terms of that voice, and in terms of the overall order of operation, or the ideation, or just the bigger picture, right? And so if we continue down that pathway, we're just maintaining.
Yeah.
And so my question always is, how do we change? What are these subtle things that we change, and how do we even write our contracts differently, or how do we communicate with the builder differently? How do we propose that we form a team and instead of these individual components that will get the job done better and more efficiently? Right. So then we can be more creative.
Right. Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I mean, I'm actually of two minds there. One is that I think it's a problem in our profession that we still believe we have this sort of overall controlling view of architecture and systems and things. And an example of that would be like that we would have any agency over, say, like climate change, or any agency over, creating affordable housing. Mm-hmm. Like affordable housing is a great example, because I love doing that. We don't get the opportunity very often. It's something we think about a lot, especially living in a city where now we can't really design for normal people anymore. Like even 2 or 3 years ago, I mean, I was thinking we used to have normal couples that we would design a house, cool architect design house for. on a relatively not modest budget, but like doable budget. And that in the last 3 years, right? It's like staggering.
Astronomical, yeah.
It's just like if a lot costs $1 million and it's like 1.5 to do a house, it's 2.5. I mean, I can't afford that.
Yeah.
Could you afford that? So, but what I was going to say is that I do think there is a certain rhetoric in the profession in academia that we have agency or control over those things. And I just don't think, I don't think we do really. And I don't want to sound like discouraging or a downer. It's like, take affordable housing, for instance. Like, we don't have control over land costs. Even if you design the simplest thing, it's like, you can't design your way. It's not a design problem.
Yeah.
Right. The affordability crisis in Austin is simply not a design problem. If by the time you get, you're looking at a lot, like just the cost of construction and stuff. Same thing to a certain degree with climate change. It's sort of like the recycling model. Where it's like the individual, it's got to be like a kind of global or a kind of larger systemic effort to tackle these problems. And I think the point I'm trying to make is like, I think what you're saying is right. There's like, we have a kind of, bit part in the overall process. But, if you look at like the kind of language coming out of AI Austin, or to a certain degree in academia too, that there is this sort of idea that we can, as architects, we can create like affordable communities, and we can create like, and it's just not true. I think that a lot of, so I think the first challenge is like understanding like, what is our real role, right? Like, what can we do in architecture and in the world? And so what I mean by being of two minds is like, there's actually, as I've gotten older, I actually take kind of comfort and find it more interesting and reassuring that we have like a bit part. Yeah. Like, I kind of feel like we're like mechanics or bus drivers or something. Yeah. And to me, I think it's a much more interesting role in the world to provide a service to people and in a much like more like, when I think about like what we do in the office, people come to us and they have very specific needs, right? And we're providing that a service to design something for them, given the system. And to me, I find that a very, more interesting role than being like the role of, master over the design of the world or something.
It removes the ego and puts it on an equal playing field in terms of the conversation, because we're a service industry, right?
Yeah, exactly. A service industry providing, like, again, like a mechanic, somebody comes and they've got like a weird, cool old car and you help them fix it, right? Yeah. And I think that's a more interesting approach. And I think from like a design perspective too, like personally, I find it more interesting to tackle these like quieter, more mundane challenges in architecture and in the world. Like, And so I think like for me personally, like I've kind of shifted that perspective as I begin to kind of realize, because, early in my career, and I'm sure maybe you were the same, it's like I actually believed that we could.
Yeah.
I actually believed that you could design, that it was a design problem, affordability. If you designed it right, you could make it really affordable and really cool. Yeah. And then it's just after trying a number of times and failing at it, So I think that to me, but there is a problem with this tension between like what architects perceive their role is and what we're actually doing, right? Yeah. Like I think we're like somewhere in there with the carpenters or whatever. Like, and I think about it a lot with trades, right? Like, because I do find one of the things I love about architecture is, there are hundreds of people touch like any building, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's amazing, and I'm always amazed. It's like the number, how little interface we actually have with those people.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think, we've both witnessed like there's like kind of outflow of interest, and maybe it's like, I'm not sure why exactly. It's probably because tech is like so much more alluring job or cost to go into. But like I think there's not as much interest in becoming like a plumber or becoming like a 20 or 30 years ago, or like an HVAC.
Sure. That's across all trades.
Yeah, across all trades. I think about carpenters, right? So like our role, like if I think about like like when I find like who inspires me, it's like really good carpenters, in Austin, right? Yeah. Like they were artists or they went to art school, and they're like, there are a handful of those people out there. They're fewer and
masters,
fewer. Yeah, masters. Like I think about the opportunities we've had. Most of the projects we're working on like relatively modest budgets, right? So we're having, but occasionally we'll work with like a contractor, and we've, had the opportunity to like work with Enabler, and like, and those guys, I just feel like, wow, they're just taking our details and elevating.
Right. You know? That's right.
And to me, that's something when I think about like what I aspire to as an architect, I want to be like one of those enabler guys, as an architect that can have that knowledge and kind of like provide the kind of craft within a very specific context.
I think that's where the system is broken, and it starts with our education, right? We start in these schools where we're so insular, and we're thinking about these creative ideas, but we're not really thinking about how they get built or who builds them, or how do we communicate across the board in order to make that happen. Like, what's the total project and what's the total time requirement or job requirement in order to make that one idea? Like, they're huge projects. You have no business like. I mean, it's good in a problem-solving way, but Jeremy and I talk all the time about like, I think the system's broken because we bifurcate or we just individualize these components in a way to when you get on the job site, especially a residential project or a commercial project, when you've got 30 different guys or people on a job site and they're all working together and they're kind of talking to one another. They're kind of have tunnel vision, but they're there. Yeah. It's like, we don't work like that. And I think there's a real cog in the wheel in terms of how we partner or how we work with the systems in order to make that happen.
Do you mean like we're not working with like the contractor or the builders closely?
Yeah. And you can say, oh, well, we do CA, but it's very formalized in what we do and the time we do it and how we respond. And it's all dictated by the contract.
Like, are most of your projects, like, are you bidding any jobs, or are they like CM at risk where you have like a pre-selected contractor?
We mostly partner early, and we're not a true design build, but Jeremy's on a lot, Citadel's on a lot of our projects to where we get them in early.
But see, that's awesome if you all have a relationship with a builder and you built things before, because one of the challenges with architecture is the kind of one-off thing, right? Where it's like every situation, it's like new program, new site, new set of rules, new contractor, especially if you're like bidding a job and you don't know who the GC is until the CDs are done.
We'll almost shy away from those projects.
For sure.
It's just
it's impossible.
That's that old way of doing things. It just is broken.
For sure. But if you have somebody that you worked with before, and we have, we don't always have the opportunity of picking our GCs, right? We can suggest people, but if you build, like, that's a relationship you got to build over years, over several projects, right?
Sure. Absolutely.
So when you look at details, you're like, oh yeah, we did that, or we fixed it, and it's one of the things I think about too in architecture that's hard is this, like, everything's a prototype, right? Yeah. Like every building's a new building. I mean, and you think about manufacturing, like the first prototype for a car is like $100 million thing to make, right? And then number 2 is like 50 million. And then number 10 is like $1 million. And then by the time you work out the bugs, then you're cranking, right? And then you're getting them done for like 10 grand or whatever. I don't know what the markup on cars is. But with buildings, it's like every one is like, wow, if I could do this 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 more times, then you'd really work out the kink,
right?
With the same people in the same group. So every time it's like brand new thing. It's also one of the kind of interesting things about architecture too.
Sure.
It's like, well, you talk about the mess, which I think is one of the things that you've got to like enjoy in architecture. I mean, I think we all suffer from the same problem of being, as architects wanting to control everything, right? And have like everything really kind of like refined and controlled, but then the reality of that, during construction of, it's hard for people. Like I have staff that are really inspired and fanatical at architecture. And it's just like, when you go into a project and I'm sure, many of my colleagues suffer from the same, problem of like, all you see is the flaws, right? Like you walk into like I can't tell you the number of times I walk in projects of friends of mine. I'm just like, wow, this is fucking amazing. And it's like they're pointing to the one thing. And it's like, dude, why are you showing me? And I used to do it. And my wife would be like, I got to tell you something. When you tour projects, you're like pointing out these minute things that nobody really sees or cares about, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, this detail over here, we resolved, you know?
We can't really appreciate our projects until months after for the same thing. It takes a little time where you can forget about where all those things are, and then you can appreciate it for what it is.
I have had moments where like I've had projects and, you know, we're close to the end and it's just, I feel like it's like a disaster. It's just like not coming together and the contractor wants to get, you know, and oftentimes it's stuff like we find ourselves in this position where it's like the homeowner's like, it looks fine to me, you know, and even the contractor's like, thank God, right? And it's like, we're the only ones that really care about it, you know, and I've had projects where in my head, I've kind of written it off as like, okay, forget it, this project, you know, and then, you know, I had one in particular recently and, you know, we were right at the end and I was pushing the homeowner, like, hang in there, let's kind of resolve these. And they were just like, they just wanted to move in, right? They were like done. And, you know, it was punch list and it was like messy and, you know, everything dirty. It's like, you know, one of those projects where the contractor didn't really keep it very clean. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then, so I went back like 3 months later after they had done the final punch. They'd moved in and I walked into the space and I have to say I was really blown away. I was like, I felt like what happened? Yeah. It's like, this is fantastic. And all those little things that I was so like little panel, like alignments, you know what I mean? Like, and little joints and just the way they had done the base, it had like just filled my head with this, like, this is awful. It just was gone. I was like, I can't believe I was really worrying about it. Like the overall effect of the space. And a lot of it is the owner too. It's just like, you know, when, you know, like a homeowner who you're really in sync with, who is like, this particular homeowner had like great taste, had like amazing objects, beautiful art, great furniture. They loved the house. They had little kids. They're like living in it. And, I walked in and it was like transformed. It was like a different project. Right. And then to me, then it was like really successful. But I do feel like we wouldn't probably be doing the work we're doing if we didn't have that kind of obsessive worrying mindset, you know, about it.
Lets me know all the time.
I don't know how I got off on that kind of tangent. But again, going back to this idea, I do think about it a lot. Like we do, I think traditionally architects had sort of control over cities and design and systems. And I think there's two things. One is that we do have that diminished role, which I think I'm trying to personally embrace that. Mm-hmm. Like, again, mechanic or carpenter of like your one trade of many approach to it. But also like the system and worlds have become much more complex.
Yeah.
Like in my first jobs, we would be the civil engineers. Mm-hmm. You know, we did all the civil design. Yeah. We did wastewater, we did water tie-ins. I would do grading plans. You know, and then slowly it's like, oh, who are these guys? It's an engineering firm doing site grading? What? Like, why are you getting engineered? You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, that was a long time ago. It's like in the 80s. And then it's like, oh yeah, civil engineers are doing, you used to only hire a civil if you had like really complicated like problems to solve, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And then now it's just like,
now we're individualized, you know, we're compartmentalized in terms of what we.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean by diminished role? Like what do you mean by that?
Well, in the old days, traditionally, like architects, you had like a lot of control. It's like, this site doesn't work, use this site. Like the, you know, owners would have architects on staff that would like kind of, you know, you design cities. It was like a much broader kind of set of, I think, you know.
Yeah, I you know, the only things that we get to read are the masters, right? And the masters were choosing their clients and they were choosing the site, like Murray said, and then they were really involved in the construction, the means and methods, and they just had complete control.
And you also had like less code too. So you were like, you hired an architect because you wanted to design and build safely, right? So the architect was like, we'll do this because it's safer for fire reasons instead of being like code consultants, which we hire now on projects. It gets really complicated. But yeah, diminished role in that. I do think like if you spend time with the professional organizations, or if you spend time in schools, there is still this belief that the architect has control over the design of the world, right?
Yeah.
You know, that we can solve climate change and affordability and equitable communities and these super important social problems. And I'm looking at them like, we have so little control. And I think the affordability thing is really one of the challenges, because it's just simply not a design problem.
Yeah.
I don't know what you think, but
no, because there's the cost, like you were saying, there's a cost of the land there. And if you were just to pencil out a box, a conditioned box, there's your solution, right? Because that's all really that's needed. And I don't know what, the placement of the location of the site has anything to do with it. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, or the amount of units that you can put on the site. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but it's not necessarily about that. It's like we did some micro homes for mobilos and fishes, and it was highly focused on the product on the house, but it wasn't, right. It's not about that. Because essentially there's a kitchenette and there's a bed, and there's this shell that makes one feel safe, and there's certain things in that world that makes one feel safe, because it's a different mentality. But really, when you go and you visit, it's what's between the boxes, and how do they socialize and communicate, and what do they what do they do outside of these boxes?
Right.
Is it an economic thing, or is it a consumer thing? What do you think the challenge is?
Yeah, socioeconomic challenge. I mean, here's something interesting for me, having lived in Austin 30 years now or something.
Yeah.
You're from here, right? You're from Waxahachie, right?
I am.
Yeah,
I'm
you're
from
Texan.
Texas.
Yeah. Okay. Are you Texan as well?
I was born here.
Born here. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. You got me beat. But I grew up in Toronto and moved to New York when I was a teenager. So Toronto and New York are like quote home. And from the time I'm pushing 60, right? So from the time I was a little kid, I remember Toronto was like, oh my God, that house is so expensive. What? That's $1 million for that thing? Like the notion of Toronto being expensive has always been there. It's always been like in the DNA of that city. New York, same thing, right? Yeah. New York's a different story, because I do recall it was like, like you could buy buildings for $1. Like my sister, who lives in New York, was a squatter in the 80s, right? So she and her artist friends like took over buildings and just lived in them. They were abandoned buildings. So not to go into a lot of detail, but because of rent control, right? Yeah. It was cheaper to what they call warehouse buildings. So owners couldn't renovate them. And even though land value and rents were very high in New York always, it was more affordable just to leave them empty for them than to renovate them, because the rents they could charge were too low, right? Yeah. So there were all these abandoned buildings, and there's a housing crisis. So artists would move into these buildings and take them over. And she ended up moving into one. She lived in two, and then 7.5 2nd Ave with 3 other people. She was in for like 15 years, and they actually got ownership of the building eventually and stuff. Wow. But both New York and Toronto had these like, oh my God, it's crazy expensive. Yeah. But it was still affordable, right?
Yeah.
Why? Whereas Austin has that, oh my God, that's crazy expensive, but it's not affordable.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between Toronto, New York, and Austin?
Density.
It's a cultural thing, right? Like in New York City, you have rent control.
Yeah.
Right? In Toronto, it's a social democracy. It's a totally different system, right? Yeah. My friends in Toronto will be like, you're crazy. Toronto sucks. Like the economy is terrible, but it's a different socioeconomic system. So first of all, like it wasn't taboo to rent, right?
Yeah.
If you rented and you were like a family, people were like, what's wrong with these people? You know what I mean? Like, well, they don't have money to buy a place. Yeah. Like that's the first thing. It's like a mental thing. It's like renting was a normal way to rent's fine. You don't have to buy. Yeah. There was no pressure to like buy a place. Yeah. Because you had these other mechanisms. Toronto's the same way. So you've got like co-ops, and you've got like rent to own, and you've got all of these other mechanisms, different mortgage structures to live. So, if you were really wealthy, you could buy a place like, in the 80s or 90s, $1 million house and tear it down and build it in Toronto. But you had all these other ways of affordable ways of living. Whereas here in Austin, it's kind of like, that like, oh my God, am I ever going to be able to afford to buy a place? Because you can't, like renting is kind of like there's no protections for renters or anything. And there's no other options, right? Yeah. Like there's no, like pretty much in Austin, it's like those little bungalow starter houses. Like that's the interesting thing about Austin. Austin used to be when I moved here, it was an affordable city. It's the reason why I stayed, really. I moved from New York and I was like, my friends were like artists and filmmakers and stuff, and nobody had jobs. They were just doing their work. Mm-hmm. And I went from paying like my loft in Williamsburg, the rent I was paying in the 90s is more than my mortgage is now.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So it was affordable. It was a city of affordable. Like there were crappy little bungalows, but they were affordable. You could buy one for like 90 grand. I remember like 35 grand around the block from where I lived. It was like $35,000 you could buy a house, right? Yeah. And now those are what, like $600-700?
At least probably.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Who can afford that? Yeah. Like unless you work for Google or like whatever. But so it's a problem because also like I don't know if you're finding it, but like I'm finding it too. Like when we're interviewing people, young creative architects that want to work for quote unquote creative office, they're like, dude, I can't live here.
I know.
It's like I would interview people from all over the country, right? Like we interview people and they're like moving to Austin. It's like, whoa, I was checking out rents. And I need to make like a lot of coin to live in your city. Mm-hmm. Yep. Whereas in the past we could be like, I'm staying in Austin because it's affordable. Yep. Like cool, like creative people would be like, want to stay here. I can afford to live here and it's a cool city. So now I'm facing it's like, please stay, don't move. Yeah. It's like, don't go, stay. You're really good at what you do. And you know what I'm saying? It's a bit of a problem.
Yeah, it is. It's we got on a segment for a while to try to find housing for our employees.
Yeah, right.
For people moving into town and we were successful in some ways, but there's still really no options. And all the young people want to live in the cool spots and places where they can socialize. They don't want to go, too much further out of town. So.
And what, commute or like,
Yeah, right. And
work remote or whatever.
And then, there still is like the competitive there. So there's a cost of living and there's the competitive salary range, which we can't compete to some of the other folks. And if they want to live in Austin, then there's the salaries to support it. And,
it's true. And I do think though, like I think a lot about that too. Like and like in our profession, you used to be able to make like, okay, we're a small, quote, creative studio. I mean, we really pride ourselves on like not working crazy hours. Yeah. Like, I don't know about you. My first jobs, I was like at the office until midnight.
Yeah, same here.
Like, I remember once like the people we were officing next to, they were a developer and they were like, I remember the guy saying, wow, man, you were here. You were the last person here because I left at 10 p.m. and your car was here. And I came in this morning. You were the first person here. Yeah. And I was like, dude, I stayed all night. Yeah. I was like, literally, I didn't sleep. I was like working all night, like routinely deadlines that were like unrealistic and stuff. And it's just way old. But like I really think, and I used to have like a lot of anxiety about, I don't know about you, but like feeling like the office needed to be productive and work harder and work more and that more meant better. But I kind of like backed off that and really like can't think of the last time. I mean, I work all the time because I like it, but like I can't think of the last time the staff worked over a weekend or past like 6 p.m. in the office.
We really don't do that at all.
Yeah.
And I enjoy life too much. Like my brain's always working, whether I'm in the office or not. And that's just that we own a business and that's just kind of the thing that we have to do most cases. But I even culturally these days, that doesn't work. If you have a staff and you ask them to work continuously,
it's
over whatever the 5 or 6, and even on the weekends, it's going to break. Right? It's like that's not our culture anymore.
Yeah. Which is a really good thing, right? And actually, I think it works better, right? Like, I don't think putting more time into it actually makes the work better.
I think what we try to do is be more efficient in some way. Yeah. Right? I mean, there's no reason why we can't get our work done in the hours that we have during the day. Right. And if we can't, then we have to communicate properly about what that means. Right. Either it's internally or it's to our clients or the builder.
Yeah.
And that conversation there forces you to really forecast what that project means and how you're going to get the work done.
Right.
And sometimes those conversations are difficult because it's clients that don't want to hear that things are going to be delayed or they're too costly or whatever. Yeah. But shit's hard.
Yeah, I know.
It's like, what do you want?
To like, just like crank shit out. Yeah. But the point I was going to make is like, there used to not be as many big corporate offices here. Part of it is a remote work thing. Man. Like now people can work anywhere, right? So you can have so there's like a lot of like larger corporate offices in Austin that do pay more. Yeah. Right. But they also like, they're going to hire like a dozen people and they're going to fire a dozen people and things, So it is harder to make the argument, though, that you're like a small creative office and you can't pay as much.
Yeah. Right.
It just is kind of like lost on people, which I totally understand, right? Like, it's not like we're not paying. I mean, I try, it's one of my goals is to try to like always like increase,
well,
try to be competitive and,
What it also is it's a better education, like our architecture and construction. That's you're not gonna get that in a couple of years,
right?
And there's so much that you need to know all across the board that mentorship and that education in a small shop or that's how we sell it. It's invaluable.
Yeah,
that's you can move that, you can scale it wherever you want to go.
Yeah, I agree.
And if you do it correctly, you can hold on and you can mentor those folks and grow them into whatever they choose to be. But
I don't know how much people value that, but I think some people do. Like, I do think, like, I'm sure your office is similar to ours. Like, you're working with a couple of people on a project. You get to go to client meetings, right? And
see everything.
You see everything. You get to hear all, like, I try to be as transparent as possible. Like the staff, like all the contracts, like everything. In my old office, they had the contracts were like under lock and key, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Same here.
Like you had no idea what the fees were or what your billable rate
sunk
was.
Hours into it.
And all this, suddenly the principal would come and be like, we need to get this done on Friday. You know how many hours we spent on this thing? And I'm like, what? I have no clue. Was there a budget of time? Like, so I try to have a conversation with people about that. But so.
How do you, Jeremy and I talk about often that, going back to how the system is broken in a way that even in school, I always tell the story. Whenever I taught at A&M, I got offered to teach a class that was a design build class, and then we got a $20,000 grant for me to take 10 architecture students and 8 construction science students. And our task was to design and build a house, a tiny home,
right,
in 3.5 months. It's crazy.
Yeah, right.
These kids had never picked up a nail gun. They had never done anything. And so
sounds dangerous.
But I mean, it was fun danger. But when they showed up in the classroom, they immediately set separately. The architecture kids are over here, the construction science kids are over here.
Yeah.
And they had these stereotypes of one another that was already broken.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the switcheroo was, all right, well, construction side science kids, you design it, and architecture kids, you're gonna budget it and make sure that things are coordinated. And so it's like, I think we still teach those traditional methods and ideas that are just broken.
Yeah.
And so
I still feel it. Like, I don't know. It took me like 10 years after I was out of school and I was in construction before I was really understood some of the basics of detailing, flashing. Like, took me, now we draw flashing details.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I love brake metal flashing details. Like, I think it's one of those trades like art. Like, I don't know if you know Brian Fuller, Straight Solutions.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Like, we actually get him in the office to consult with him on detailing. Like,
I forgot about that.
His flashing details are amazing. I remember we did this one project with him. And again, it was like one of those moments where I kind of like half-assed drawn. I had no idea what I was drawing, like flashing details, like on a curving roof. And it's like, they did this thing, it was in copper too, right? And I was like, it's the first job he worked on. And I was like, wow, it's a thing of beauty. It's like so beautifully done. The nosing and the way the brake metal was hemmed and the way they radiused it so you didn't see the kinks and everything.
I think that could be the thing, though, is we don't ask. right? We don't say, hey, I don't know how to do this. Can you tell me how would you do it? Or what's your trade say? Can we get this trade?
You come out on a job site. And I do remember when I was younger feeling quite awkward, like I was the architect and, you have this presumption of knowing everything. And it's like, I had no freaking clue really how things go together. I still don't really. Like sometimes I'm still kind of clueless on like, is that a stucco assembly? Does this go here or there? You know what I mean? Right. But going back to this idea of the construction, I don't know. It's a really kind of tricky question because I do think that there is a healthy distance, right, too. Like I think not knowing is also kind of can be useful. Like I think as an architect, sometimes you're thinking about different things, right? Like you're thinking about the end product and you're thinking about a certain effect, right? I think about like theater, like if you're a playwright, you're thinking about the emotional core of the effect you're trying to get on the audience, right? The illusion of the actor and like in a really successful play, right? You're transported, you're moved. It's just like an empty blank slate, right? Lighting, that set. And you want to convey that feeling of something meaniful or poignant or powerful, right? Like, I don't know, watch The Holdovers.
Yeah.
Have you seen the movie?
Yeah. That's a good one.
It's just such a beautiful story, right? Yeah. And I'm thinking about like, that's like Alexander Payne was trying to convey something in that. Have you seen the movie?
Watch it. No. Yeah.
It's really good. Paul Giamatti. It's just a very touching story. Like at first I was kind of put off by the whole thing. It was like prep school, white guys in a prep. It's like, who cares?
Yeah, it's pretty powerful.
It's a very poignant story. And we watched it twice. And I'm thinking like, okay, for Alexander Payne, it's like he's conveying, like that ending is so poignant, And it's like, does Alexander Payne know how to have to know all the technical things of the lighting? And it's like, he's got to focus on like the performance of Paul Giamatti, that amazing kid. And it's just such an amazing like trinity of people in the emotional content. And I think that's like such and for an architect, I think like, good architecture conveys a certain kind of feeling or energy or, when you go into a good space, it's like transporting, right? Yeah. And it's like the quality of light and the material. I mean, the way it goes together, the kind of nostalgia it can evoke. And it's like, does the architect need to know what the mortar mix is for the brick? I don't think so.
I think
it actually could bring you down. Like, I think you could actually, if Alexander Payne lost that performance, but knew all the technical things, like, would it matter?
Yeah.
No, right? Who gives a shit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, at the same time, I do feel like I do think you can elevate the work through the detail and through knowing how things go together, right? But so
I was going to say, I think there needs to be a little overlap. And I'm speaking from a contractor. A lot of times, if we know what your vision is, and we get a little feedback on that, it's better. Because a lot of times, something will be drawn or designed, and there's no real discussion of the why.
Yeah.
Then there might be something that we think, well, that won't work, and a lot of times the architect will be, that's just the way it is. You got to do it.
Yeah.
And so there's some beauty in the collaboration. Go back to what we're talking about. Is we need to understand kind of what we're going for.
I think you nailed it, though. I think the problem is that for most architects there is no why.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think like I always think about this. Like if I. Like for all of my talk about like worrying, fretting over little details and stuff, I actually don't give a shit as much about I mean, I'm thinking like it's much better. It's better if the overall effect is there. Who cares if like it's, engineered flooring treads on a stair that don't look very good up close. But I think the challenge is like, first of all, it's like, what is the why in the architecture? Does the architect even know what the why is? Yeah. Or is it something you're discovering? Like sometimes we don't really discover that until the end of the job. They're like, oh, that's
sure. Yeah.
So
justified.
But to go back to your question, I do feel like, I don't know, it's hard because having taught in architecture school, you've taught, there's just like I don't know, like if you can teach detailing. I don't know. I mean, I guess my question is like what you talk about, the separation in the room between like the construction science kids and the architects. I don't know. I do feel like there could be a curriculum where you're sort of learning detailing, or you're getting a little bit more knowledge on how things are built. But I'm not sure what that would look like.
I think that's where it's all broke. What you said is real important in that we don't need to know everything, but we do need to know how to assemble the minds in order to get the thing done.
Yeah.
Right. And so the lack of understanding how to communicate and coordinate and know when to assemble those minds in order to get the system complete is what we should be focused on in a way, because we shouldn't, they're so complex. There's no way that we can keep all of the little nitty gritty and more. I mean, it's like, it's nuts.
Yeah, having the right people. It's like knowing, like when suddenly a light bulb went on my head, I was like, oh, let's just like, wait, it's like, we don't know how to flash this. Let's get Brian in the office. Right. Who's like, real pro at,
But then you think back, okay, well, here's another traditional method of contracts. Like, what are we liable for?
Yeah.
So if we're intent driven and our documents are intent driven, and we have this really beautiful process with how we collaborate and how we get these projects done, then you go back to this old ass AIA document that says architect is responsible for all of these things, and if it's not in your drawings, then you're going to get sued. Yeah. Like all these things are intertwined in a way that makes us perform or makes us respond in a drawing format that is just not, it's not ideal anymore.
We stopped using AIA agreements.
I try, but geez.
Because I mean, they're for smaller jobs, but like we've crafted a contract with our attorney that actually has more of that sort of responsibility. The contractor is responsible for more stuff. But again, it goes back to this idea of like, if you want, like, that's a diminished responsibility thing, right? So, it's like we used to cost estimate. Do you cost estimate anymore?
Right. And that's why we try to partner early.
Mm-hmm. We used to do it. It used to be like in our contract to cost estimate, and what we'll do now is like we'll show people real examples, like in 20, I don't know, when we bid this in 2020, this costs like 1.75. Things have gone up, 30%? Like we'll show examples of what things cost in the past, but like when it comes to like cost estimating, I just say it's going to cost more and take way longer than you think.
Yeah.
That's like our commitment to.
I think that early cost estimating is something that we've been trying to collectively do. And that then solidifies like the working relationship, because we can cost estimate, but we're not gonna get too terribly close. But we can talk about the intent and work with the builder and do that as a collective mindset, because it requires that. It doesn't. One body of one group can't do it on their own, because they don't know the intent, and we hand them a set of drawings that are not detailed enough to where they can't. It's just like,
I mean, I tried to take this approach because for years we worked in this way. Like when I worked in offices, we were always caught in the same problem of like the budgets were too low, expectations were too high, and no matter how good a job we did, we always set ourselves up for failure, right? And it's a certain old school mindset of like, you had 3 million, but don't say you have 3. Say you have 2.
Right.
Right.
That's right.
And you know what I mean? So the budget's 2, even though it's going to cost 3.
Right.
So you're like, and everyone kind of knew
it.
Everyone kind of knew it. Like, and we would work, and I won't name clients, but like for big public clients that built hundreds of projects, and it was always the same game. It's like 1.67 is nowhere near. This is double the cost, and everyone would be like, So anyway, and they would just like not address a budget, right? And so what happened would be we would always fail, even though we would come in at like 1.9, which was like a screaming deal for the building. The budget was 1.6, right? And so like, and now like in our office, we try to do this other thing where it's like, let's establish a budget. And in 2 years, when the project's done, you should have money left over. Right.
Yeah.
even if it's a super painful number, right? And it's a different like approach. Like, and some people think like, I think like if you say it's 3, then they're going to spend 3. If you say it's 4, you're going to spend 4, which is a weird kind of like psychological position, but it's way too stressful. You know what I mean? It's way too stressful. And I do think there is a certain, I think, culture with some contractors, with some architects of like, kind of like, don't scare the bunny. Like, oh, your budget's 2. That's interesting.
Don't tell them that.
Like, oh, well, look at that. And you know what I mean? Like, and I think from a client's perspective, they don't hear you saying that's not enough money. They hear like, they're not saying no. And so there's this sort of like expectation. So, but like what I try to do now is just be is brutally, just really, really transparent, really honest with people. And, you know, sometimes we lose jobs because of that, because, you know, but I'd rather be in that position. Like you should, if you have a budget of 2, you should be at the very end, have like 1.95 left. Right. Or whatever that is. And it's, you know, and I think like what I found, the interesting thing is like that clients they seem like much happier at the end, even though like, cause you're sharing the bad news in the beginning, you know, because you're being really transparent and honest with them. And like we've had projects where the clients are just shocked, like even say a little addition remodel job, $500,000. It's like, are you kidding me? We're just adding a bedroom.
I know.
And I'm just like, I know it shouldn't cost this much. I'm just showing you, here are examples. And like, are you designing it? Is it too complicated? And I try to explain, these are like really modest contractor, just a guy in a pickup truck. He's not his market, but you know, I'll show them examples, right? And that's the best we can do. Is just say like somebody out there might be able to do it for way cheaper. And I just think like that's an approach that I've taken that is like hard, because we've lost some really sweet projects because, you know, I come in Mr. Gloom and Doom, like, you know. And
call those civil engineers.
Right.
Can't do it.
Yeah. Like, so, but I'd much rather be in that position of just like trying to be honest with people about where we have control and where we don't. At the same time, I do feel like if I look back at like our favorite projects, they're the ones with the really tight, modest budgets. Like
the constraints.
And like trying to do something really cool and keep it really small. And like the project that, you know, that little house like that we showed, like that was like $300 a square foot or whatever. And, you know, really small and really compact and efficiently designed and stuff. Repeatable, maybe. I don't know. But I love those projects, right? Like where you don't have infinite, you know, amount of money and stuff. But but yeah, going back, your question is about like that. I think that tension between, and again, I think it goes to recognizing like a role as an architect, the tension between like what you not like, and I think you know, it takes a lot of maturity as an architect to go like, I really don't know. You know, can you guys help me here? You know, you're with like the concrete sub, the rebar fabricator, right? And it's like, we have this project in Dallas that has this, we're trying to do in concrete. It's a compound curving shell. We've done a bunch of park pavilions in Dallas out of steel. And we're like, let's make this one out of concrete. And it's just been really hard because it's compound curving rebar. And it's just like, we've had a really hard time and had to work with the concrete contractor to find a sub that can bend compound curve. You know, they're looking at it, they're like, I have no idea how we would bend a model.
Where does the tension come from, you think, though? I mean,
but that's an example of like where it's like we drew something that literally nobody knew how to build, you know? So you have to kind of get in the weeds and be a little bit more involved in like, which was fun. We did drawings. We did like Rhino model drawings of all the rebar, which you'd never do, right? Draw rebar. When was the last time you drew rebar? And sent it and then got in touch because the concrete sub was subbing out the rebar fabrication, right? So we got in touch with a company in Houston that did the rebar, and we got to have like a conversation with him. We sent him a bar, and he's like, "Oh, okay, well, we could probably bend that one. There's like 500 bars, they're all different. We could do that one." It's like, okay, phew, they could do one. So we kind of worked that way with them. Whereas like just sending it out, people were like, I think what happened was with that project was that people were like, know, like they would just look at it and be like, forget it, it's too hard, or I don't know how to do this, so.
Well, it takes a proper team. It's like the pitch. We had never done that before. And the way that we got through it was not us drawing it first and then passing it on. It was us sitting at the round table with Jeremy's team and the steel.
You all built it?
Steel guy.
Cool. Congrats, guys. This is a really beautiful project.
But it was, passing models back and forth just to see, all right, does this work or does it not work?
Well, that challenge and then that collaboration in turn was what made that really enjoyable.
More interesting and fun.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And then you all have more investment in the actual process and the design and detailing. And I think that's the way to go, right? Like any close collaboration with a contractor.
Well, then we had an owner that was open-minded as well.
Yeah.
He trusted the team.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like for me, and I'm sure for you too, that, I think the most satisfying jobs is where the owner's really into it and invested and have ideas and the builder's really into it. And it is like a group effort.
That's it.
There's alignment,
the only way to go.
Right? There's alignment with all the people involved.
Yeah.
And that's the projects we look for. It's not necessarily, we want to do a hotel or we want to do this thing or this thing. It
could be a doghouse, doesn't matter.
How can we assemble this team that we like?
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's hard work no matter what.
Yeah.
No matter how big or small.
Because you've had this experience like drawing something and like having contractors look at it just like, I just don't want to build this. This is too hard or weird or, and it doesn't take much to, but to find people that are, and we have this like little primer when it comes to like hiring contractors, we send owners and it's like things to look for. And like number one is like enthusiastic about the project, right? Not like, oh, God, this looks hard or, too difficult.
Yeah.
And I think that's like such an important thing. You want somebody who's enthusiastic, about it.
Yeah. Are we?
We're out of time.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
I don't know. We could probably talk for another hour.
Right. Yeah, keep going. Yeah.
I was going to say too that to that point, there's a national. I think they're national. There's a national framer that we've done work with a couple times that they won't touch our drawings because they know it's going to be too difficult.
Yeah.
And
you don't want that reputation either as an architect of being like, oh, difficult means expensive. And, so it's one of the challenges of working on things of like varying.
Yeah.
Like we have projects in the office that are like super low budge, right? Like, we're really modest, like we have to do stick framing and cement board and even plastic wind, like really, really modest. Then we have other things that are like, $1,500 a square foot and stuff. So it's just hard, like, because you get this you don't want to be perceived as an architect that only does like really expensive,
we didn't think
fancy
we were,
things.
but apparently but at any rate, man, it was really nice talking to you.
Yeah. Thanks for the invite. Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you for coming and just riffing on whatever comes to mind.
Right. Kind of freewheeling conversation.
I think that's what it's about. And, it reminds me too, like it could be equally as nice to get a group in the room. We'd probably need more than an hour, but just talk about some of these complexities about what we do and how we do it. Because what is missing, what I used to have when I lived in San Diego, it was a lot richer of discussion. But when I moved to Austin, I don't have.
Oh, really? Okay.
I don't have a lot of.
Okay, you had more people you could talk to.
Right. So. It's not. It just didn't seem that open, and part of it could be me now. I'm a little bit more insular and whatever else is going on, family and whatnot. But like that conversation is really important, and hopefully this platform. Will open some of those doors. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I always, especially when we have guests in that are on the design side, I learn so much, and one of my big takeaways now from you is just that, there's that you feel like you've got this obligation to solve these big problems. Yeah. And I've never considered that I can understand that's part of what you guys are doing, right?
Yeah.
That's a burden.
I don't know how good a job we're doing, but
that's a thankless job. Sometimes. That's right.
Yeah, I know. Well, I don't know. There's some like movement, right? Like I do feel like the city has, like I love the fact the parking requirements are.
Yeah, that's right. In the last, the
3-unit
4 months, they've moved much more than they have over the past 15 years.
Yeah. So there's some movement. I don't know if it's going to make much of a dent in the affordability thing. Like the 3-unit thing, maybe.
Well, market will dictate
Yeah. I mean, we've had some clients come to us. So we have like one property they want to do 9 units, and another property they want to do 3.
Then there's compatibility that they're looking at. And like this density site plan thing, affordability unlocked. And
so there's
some cool stuff, but they need to go further, in order to solve this affordable crisis.
Yeah, I know. I'd love to do it'd be cool. We think about it like on an 8,000 square foot lot. Like we haven't actually tackled it, but like what 3 or 4 or 5 units would look. I don't know if have you done that yet? Like in a SF3, like typical neighborhood, like what 3 units could look like, or.
We're actually doing one now that's 4 units under affordability unlocked.
Okay, cool.
And there's
where 2 of them are like market rate and 2 are like.
It's 100% affordable.
Okay. Oh, wow.
And they're each one is 1,500 square feet or less, 1,200 square feet or less. So
that's nice.
And they're just subtle changes in the plan. And
very cool. What kind of neighborhood is it in?
It's East Austin off Carver. So it was donated land. So it's all needs to be sensitive to the neighborhood and the culture around it.
And how are those funded? Like, is it like a not-for-profit?
It actually affordability unlocked. They're funding.
Oh, really? Okay.
Portion of the project.
The client's the city, or
client is a nonprofit group.
Okay,
ARA.
nonprofit. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So, it is like the task is, well, what does a 2-story box cost? Right. And you start there and say,
it's expensive because they're so small. The economy of scale is a tricky part with the little infill 1 or 2 units. It gets really expensive. That's the hard part.
And then, what we don't want to do is just put a white modern box on the ground, right? Because it's not sensitive to what was there or who's around it. And
like, I wonder if you could achieve economy of scale if like a developer, if you did like 100 units, but on 50 sites.
Yeah.
Like, would that work?
The land just depends on the land cost.
Well, land costs, but I mean, like, because, the thing we always find with ADUs, because people are always shocked, like, I don't know, like for us, ADUs like costing $500,000 now, roughly. Just a modest one, right? 1,100 square foot. And people are kind of shocked by that, like, because the smaller you get, and it's like, well, what if we made it 900 square feet? And it's like, it's probably going to be $550.
Well, it's like affordable by nature of square footage, not necessarily cost per square foot.
Exactly. Because you have everything like a house has, little tiny site, and then it's hard. Like, well, things are getting a little bit. I don't know what you're finding the market's like. Things are getting maybe a little.
But
I hope so. It's hard to find somebody. How big is it? Forget it. Like contractors just passing on it.
That's true.
Because it's too small.
I deal with it.
But there must be a way. I mean, there are like interesting methods, I think, that like there was somebody who was trying to do this method where you could, I guess the developer would like lease land in people's backyards and do units. And that you could, I can't remember what the financial mechanism, they were like alternative financial mechanisms for people to build these buildings in their backyard. So you would like lease it, I guess, but the developer was responsible for the construction. It was like a long-term lease.
That's interesting.
Do you know what I mean? Almost like a utility lease, like when you have like a utility. Like my friend in Canada who owns farmland, who's reverting it back to forest. He's got like windmills, so he leases, he makes $30,000 a year to a windmill company. It's like a power.
Wow.
And you could do something like that where it's like the developer, you know what I'm saying? I know there was a group in town that was trying to get something like that off the ground, so that wasn't on the individual homeowner for doing it. Right. But
well, I guess that's what the, when, what do they call them? Turbines.
Yeah, wind turbines.
That's what they do now, right?
Right. But you do that with housing, land. Right? Yeah. So there's a developer who kind of is responsible for building it, and then you're basically just like leasing the right to use the land, so you don't have to go through this like land sale business, you know. But
that's
I think so much of one of the challenges with our economy is like so much of the personal wealth is wrapped up in your, for most people, it's their home. It's their biggest asset.
Right. Yeah.
And there's a huge pressure to buy more and build bigger, right?
Yeah.
Because of the equity that you built into that. So that is a difficult, if it wasn't, then I think like prices would be a little lower and more.
Yeah.
So I think, the affordability thing is like, think about a lot. Like we rent our office. I don't know. We do too. You do too. Yeah. So I've been trying to get out of that. And it's just like hard. It's like I was trying to buy that property next to me, right? He wants 800. And I'm thinking, okay, well, we'll build something in the backyard it's an office, and it's like I'm in for like 1.5. And the staff was like really excited, but then I explained to them, it's like all the money would be going to
that's
that.
Right.
And it's like, forget raises. It was like last year we went to DC on a retreat. Yeah. Like we took the staff, we went for 4 days, which was really fun. We visited the Glenstone and we went to the National Archive and stuff like that. And it's just like nice to do those things. And I'm like, we can't do that kind of stuff but
house poor.
We are thinking about, that's one thing I'd love to chat with you guys about. Like, I don't know. Well, you're moving to a new office, aren't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That remodel looks cool, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jeremy's doing it.
Oh, you're doing that? Yeah, it looks really great. Because, I live in that, and our office is in that area there.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so I've gone past that building quite frequently.
Walk you through it. Yeah.
So how much space do you have in there? So
we have the top floor, which was 500-ish, and we're subleasing some portion of it.
So you're 2,500. That's cool.
So we can afford it.
Yeah, right.
Or semi-afford it.
I mean, I always had this dream, like one of the things about Austin I never really liked is like coming from Toronto and New York was like always lived in like old industrial buildings,
Yeah.
Like, and it would be cool. Like, I don't know. I just have like bigger space or something for our office. Like we're like on 850 square feet and kind of bursting at the seams.
Well, we were coming from a fallout shelter that was 700 square feet.
700. Right? So it's like you're more people. Like how many people are you?
I don't know. What are we?
We're like
10, 12?
Okay, yeah. So you're gonna have tons of space. When do you move in? That's really exciting.
Or next week.
Next week. Wow. All right. Cool. So who's the owner? Do you
Michael Palumbo?
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a developer we've worked with a couple
of times. And you able to get a deal on your rent?
No. I think we got charged more.
Really? Yeah, it's a cool spot though. You got the draft horse right there.
Yeah,
you got
it'll be nice.
Deli, Uchiko, right?
Yeah.
You got a lot of cool.
Yeah, it'll be cool. We're excited. We just have to get through the current time. So but anyway, thank you.
Cool.
I would love to show you the office and
let's do that.
Jeremy asked, hey, do